You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. For over 40 years, B&H has been the professional source for photography, video, audio, and more. For your favorite gear, news, and reviews, visit us at bnh.com or download the B&H app to your iPhone or Android device. Now here's your host, Alan Weitz.
Greetings and welcome to the B&H Photography Podcast. Our guest today, Mandy Barker, is best known for her photography that presents our human waste and debris as beautiful and as interesting as possible. And we will ask Mandy about her motivations and techniques for doing just that. Mandy, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Great to have you here. Now, for listeners who may not be familiar with Mandy's work, Mandy is an internationally acclaimed photographer whose primary subject is marine plastic, of all things. Her goal is to raise awareness of the sheer quantity and ongoing harm of plastic pollution in the oceans. Her work has been published extensively, including National Geographic, Time, The Guardian, and the British Journal of Photography. Her work has been exhibited at MoMA, the United Nations headquarters, and the Victoria and Albert Museum, and she's received numerous grants and prizes. Her 2019 book, Altered Oceans, found its way into many top 10 photo book lists of that year. Now, before we start, we encourage you to have a look at B&H Podcast's homepage or Mandy's website at mandy-barker.com to get some sense of her work and the intricate and imaginative photos she makes with what is essentially plastic garbage accumulated on many expeditions. And while you're looking at the photographs, consider the fact that some of this trash you're looking at just might have made a pit stop in your home before finding its way into the open seas. Now, you once said, "Never think you can't make a difference. I thought that all my life, and then I found something I couldn't turn away from." Why did you think you couldn't make a difference, and what changed that attitude for you?
Well, I never really thought I was the type of person that had the capacity to change anything. But no one has been more surprised than me that plastic changed all that. I think as a child, I was quite a shy person and never particularly confident in the classroom or anything like that. I would always know the answer, but I'd be one of those people that never put their hand up. So I could never imagine sort of standing on a platform and speaking to large groups of people, I suppose. And perhaps part of that is thinking about what that might be that I would ever have wanted to speak about. So in a sense, I guess I didn't have a purpose and, sort of something to carry me forward to do that. But when I started working with plastic 12 years ago and realised that hardly anybody had heard about it, and I was kind of reading all about it, it was kind of instinctive that I wanted to inform people and let them know that was going on, things that they didn't know about. So I guess it's almost like you would instinctively catch somebody who was falling.
What was the exact moment where you said that, there's something here with this plastic? Because I know we go to the beach a lot in the summertime, and you go around, and especially when the tide goes out, there's always all kinds of stuff floating around, no matter where you are. In some places, it's worse than in others. But do you remember the exact moment where you said, there's something here that I have to do work with?
Yeah, it was one particular day when I was revisiting a beach that I'd sort of enjoyed as a child. And I found a computer casing, a child's car seat, the outside of a lawnmower, sort of huge things. And I just kind of wondered, it wasn't just the plastic bottles, it was like huge plastic pieces of industrial items, etc. And I just thought, how on earth have these things, been washed up from the sea? And I realised that obviously people weren't visiting the same bits of the beach that I was, and I wanted to let people know inland who perhaps don't visit the beach, what's going on and the things that I was finding about. And I think it was that day when I found those particularly sort of shocking pieces of plastic that I decided I wanted to do something.
Were you involved in photography before this particular moment? I mean, how far back do you go with the camera?
No, not at this time. I've always had a background in art. The main part of my life, I've been a graphic designer, but I've always had a really keen interest in photography. My father introduced me to photography with my first camera, which is a cosmic symbol. I don't know if anyone can remember that. It was a...
No, that's a new one to me. Wow.
That's a Russian camera from the 1970s.
I'd love it.
And it just had pictures of mountains and the sun and things like that for the time, on the lens. So
zone focusing. Yes.
Yeah. So that really got me started, and I've, kind of been a really keen amateur ever since. So while I was a graphic designer, I was, commissioning photographers for work, but never being on that side myself and always wanting to. So I decided to do a part-time course, which resulted in an MA at De Montfort University in England. And that really started the plastic issue for me.
Interesting.
The motivation to do this photography work came simply from, your need to get this word out about the plastic. It wasn't really kind of a melding of something you had already been doing stylistically to then create these images. That's pretty fascinating to me.
Yeah, no, not at all. It was a combination, really, of me wanting to go further with photography and finding the plastic on the beach at the same time. When I joined the MA photography course, one of the first tasks for us was to photograph in a completely opposite way to what we'd done before. And previously, I'd photographed in black and white portraits with natural light. And, the opposite for me was to photograph objects in a studio. And I think the idea behind this, the tutors wanted to push us to try and make something different work rather than just rehashing work that we were comfortable with. So this pushed me to try and make the approach successful. And of course, I chose plastic objects to, photograph in the studio. And, this was the beginning really of, the plastic work.
And did you consider other forms to get this word out? I mean, was it something about the photography aspect of it that really clicked for you? Or was there some kind of reaction you got from people when you started showing this that made you realize that this is having an effect?
Yeah, I think in the beginning I sort of began to photograph the plastic as I found it in a kind of a documentary approach, as I found it on the shore, trying to be creative. But when that was shown to people, I realised that they weren't really interested in seeing debris. They see enough of it at the side of the road or wherever it might be, and it didn't really hold their attention for any length of time. So I experimented with lots of different techniques and cameras. I hung debris from fishing line that I'd recovered between glass. I used 5.4 cameras. But the soup style imagery that I actually went with was the one that seemed to make people linger longer at the image and make them think about what they'd seen.
Right.
So that was the kind of device that I used.
And how did you start showing the images? As you're kind of describing here, as the process is evolving, were you exhibiting them? Was it online? And when did the first kind of solid reaction come that made you think, all right, let me invest more time and energy and money into this?
Not really during the time of the course, but after the course, I entered a couple of student competitions, and I was picked out by one of the curators at the Photographers Gallery in London as someone to watch. I also was very successful with Blurb. I don't know if you're familiar with Blurb books still. That was the runner-up in 2011, and I was invited to the Aperture Foundation in New York to be presented with an award for the Soup book. So that was, nearly 11 years ago. And since then, since I was sort of lucky with those two opportunities, the images went viral around the world the following year.
Right. And you were, I assume, at that point kind of just operating, quote unquote, under the radar, and you were funding your work yourself, and from there it grew, needless to say.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was sort of giving images out to all sorts of places for nothing because I was really grateful to get the work out there. And, money's never been a motivation for me. It's always about raising awareness and informing people about what's going on. But obviously you need some sort of financial reward to carry on what you're doing. So initially I was just very grateful to get the work out there, but gradually, I've been able to get more finance behind.
Is there something about the idea that all of these items have their own individual story that appeals to you, or do you think that appeals to the viewer?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, it would be fascinating to find out where they'd entered the ocean and the journeys they've had and, where they've ended up. And I think that's what initially inspired the work, because the first Indefinite series was just that. It was single items of different types of plastic that I photographed. And, they seemed to take on the actual creatures that that they're actually affecting. If you see the work, you'll see that there's a plastic bag there that kind of looks a bit like an octopus, and the base of a bottle that looks a bit like a fish head. And that kind of just happened as I was sort of laying it down on a black background. And, whilst you're photographing, it makes you kind of think about all the different places it could have come from and, what's happened to it. The scratches and the singed parts of things where they've been partially incinerated and then they've entered the sea. They each, can tell a story.
A couple of years ago, there was a big earthquake that created tsunamis. It originated in Japan, and everything just went crazy there. And I think it was with several months or maybe even a year after, a lot of items from Japan started washing up on the west coast of the United States, all along California and Oregon and Washington. And they've been tracking that stuff because they were curious to know how long it would take these things. And there was some interesting combinations of things that were like some things picked up other stuff along the way. Are you involved in any of that at all?
I was involved in the Japanese tsunami research expedition in 2012. This was a year and 3 months after the earthquake and tsunami in Japan.
Right.
And I was part of a team then that sailed on a 72-foot racing yacht from Tokyo to Maui in Hawaii. And basically, the scientists recovered plastic from the tsunami debris field, and I photographed everything on board the yacht that was actually taken for that particular project.
All right. Because I know the United States, all of a sudden, a lot of people started getting involved in just tracking down things that came over from that tsunami.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I actually did a project called Penalty, which was the recovery of hundreds of soccer balls from all over the world, where people collected soccer balls from their local beaches and posted them to me to make images. Okay. And one of the balls came from Japan, and it was tracked back to an area in Japan and the person who owned it. And that had, kind of come across the North Atlantic and been washed up on the West Coast. So, yeah, there are certain items that I use in my work that have been involved, in tsunamis and, various sort of natural disasters.
I also had a chuckle. There was a picture of a hair comb, and it's somebody scratched into it. If found, please return.
Yes,
you gotta love it.
Yeah.
Well, that's one of the things that I wanted to mention, because there is such a playfulness in this work, and I think that's, needless to say, very appealing and will draw people in. How conscious or how does that reflect your personality? I mean, I can imagine there has to be some kind of balancing act, because there is playfulness in this, and there's beauty in these images, but at the same time, the underground issue is heartbreaking. And how do you kind of walk that divide?
Yeah, that's true. I suppose it's a kind of my own personal contradiction, because I try to create something that will engage and hopefully go on to do something. But for myself, it can be frustrating through lack of action, or depressing by seeing the effects, or emotionally challenging, just to see declining populations of dead birds having plastic kind of pulled out of the stomachs and counted on a scientific lab bench by scientists is extremely difficult to watch. And I have to try and balance my approach, because if I do see or experience an extremely distressing issue, then maybe I'll go on the beach and collect bottle tops for a while, and I can distance myself from that. I've also been working on a project for the last 5 years, which is a personal project. It's obviously still plastic, but and recovering plastic items for the last 10 years. So I've also been using alternative photographic process to do this. So this gives me a kind of stability and a kind of a rooted focus. So if I get overwhelmed with things, I can go and work on that. Or if I've got to shut off from something. So I've got a kind of a balance and something else going on that's not as maybe distressing as other things.
This is a two-part project. It's art and it's also social. And I noticed that looking at your work, there was one thing about Coca-Cola being the largest offender out of Great Britain, because a lot of the Coca-Cola products end up, it's plastic and packaging. I mean, it all ends up just get thrown away. And of course, they have nothing to do with it. And I was reading somewhere else a few months ago that there was another presentation about the ocean cleanup. And part of the presentation was how many green straws they cleaned up on these beaches. And green straws are very specifically Starbucks. And they presented it to Starbucks saying, this is yours. How involved are you, if at all, with presenting this evidence, for lack of better words, to the companies that are actually responsible for putting it out there, but not being responsible for taking it back and cleaning it up?
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't get involved with companies directly. I pass on the data of what I collect to the people who can do something about that. For example, when I went to Henderson Island, which is, one of the most remotest islands in the world, and I found, sort of 45 different recognizable brands from more than 25 different countries. They were all logged, and data has been, kind of sent to the companies, and it's been logged for people to analyze in the future. I have made an image with Coca-Cola bottle tops because when I was traveling around the world, this is the one thing that seemed to be on every beach that I visited in every country. And I got people around the world to send me Coca-Cola tops from their beaches because, I don't just want to collect the plastic myself because I think it's good for people to get involved. So it makes them look, and also, it's kind of honest that people have collected the plastic and I catalogue where it's been taken from. Even just last year in 2021, Coca-Cola was the top polluter from, as mentioned in Break Free from Plastics audit reports.
Even if you haven't kind of done the outreach, as it were, with companies, have you seen any feedback from companies or from organizations who have been made aware of? I mean, if they don't obviously already know that they've seen images or they've seen this data and they have kind of tried to make an effort based on the work you've done?
Yes, yeah, that definitely does happen. I'm not going to name names because there are many different names, and I wouldn't want to highlight a specific organisation and then forget another one.
Right.
But yeah, the work does seem to reach people because my work, is so readily out there, and it's been, it's regularly published from Vogue to The Big Issue in Taiwan and everything in between. There's kind of no escape to not see it. And, if I'm collecting a particular brand's, objects, whether it be a toothbrush or a bottle top or whatever it might be, people are going to see that. So it makes sense for the companies to review, how they collect their plastic or, what happens to their end of use, because ultimately people like me are going to, kind of put it out there if they don't.
Can you speak a bit about how you got involved with scientists and actual expeditions? And I know you've taken several long boat trips around the oceans, but did you reach out to organizations, or did they find you after you started to collaborate and maybe discuss a little bit about how these goes? Because it's not just photography we're talking about long expeditions, grueling conditions at times. How does that kind of play out?
Yeah. Well, initially, when I started my first series and it was based on single products, I began to see on the internet about how long it took a plastic bottle to break down in the ocean, hundreds of years. And I went back to the scientists that were doing the research and predicting these sort of times. So I read in scientific journals such as Science Direct, Marine Pollution Bulletin, and the Ocean Plastic List. And I reached out to the scientists that were writing these to ask them questions, to inform my work. And then it kind of turned full circle in that they saw the work I was doing and wanted to illustrate their own research with my work. And then full circle to actually ask me to take part in scientific expeditions because I could sort of take images and visually show what they were representing. I mean, science isn't subjective as it's factual. So there's kind of no room for aesthetics within science, but, an artist can use an aesthetic approach. And I think in some way we're both seeking to achieve the same outcome, but in different ways.
Right. Certainly. Maybe that can lead us to talk a little bit about your sketchbooks, because if someone goes to your website, there's a section and they can look where you've actually photographed pages from your sketchbooks that you've done. I imagine in many situations, but certainly on expeditions. In and of themselves, they're actually kind of beautiful and an object of art to some degree to look at. But how does that inform your work, and how do you see the evolution of your final images coming from these sketchbooks?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been more interested in the process and experimenting, which is why I keep sketchbooks, because these show a lot about me in terms of how I think, and a lot of people find the sketchbooks perhaps more interesting than the final image. I mean, I certainly do sometimes, because I get an idea and I might write it down, and then I might sort of sketch it out or do some experimentations, which are quite rough. And then I might revisit it later on and come back to an idea. So it kind of informs the final image and underpins the reasons for, say, the composition and why the objects are presented in the way they are. And I feel it's vital, really, to the final result, because it allows the viewer to engage at a deeper level. In my exhibitions, I always have the sketchbooks either digitally represented, so you can kind of turn the pages, or they're actually in vitrines where people can look through. And I think this is probably what's different about me, in terms of not just showing the final image. There's many, many steps that have gone before you see the final image, and the final image is just a very small part of what I do.
And that these sketchbooks and this process connect you also to the scientific process, I would imagine too, because it is showing the work.
Yeah.
What have you learned on the scientific side of it from your journeys and from the work you've done on these expeditions? I mean, is there something that would kind of blow us away in terms of the flow and the currents of the ocean, and where a lot of this debris ends up, or something that is just surprising that you didn't expect, even after the experience that you already had?
There are many, many different sort of scientific things that have been, sort of researched while I've been on expeditions. And I think the most groundbreaking one was probably when I went to Henderson Island. Many things were discovered there, but one particular one was the increasing temperature caused by plastic in the sand. So tiny little sand-like sized microplastics in the sand that are embedded, quite a depth down, actually were found to increase the temperature of the overall sand and beach, which is particularly horrific for kind of creatures that, for example, turtles that lay their eggs in the sand. If the increased temperature can affect the sex of the egg that hatches. So increased temperatures with turtles will only produce female turtles. So this, is a real threat for the extinction of, many species of turtle. I mean, the temperature was said to have increased by 2.45 degrees C, which is huge, absolutely massive. And, there are many, many things that have been discovered while, and just even chatting to scientists about, things I don't even know about. It's absolutely essential to accompany them, because you learn so much. You're there with sort of primary examples, and it's something that can't be read about, really.
I know for me, I think one of the most mind-boggling aspects to it has to be with the longevity of how long a lot of these plastics last. I mean, a Clorox bottle could last hundreds of years. Your fiberglass speedboat, okay, it could last thousands of years for all we know. And then also you have out in the Pacific, you've got that large patch of garbage the size of Texas, and they don't even know how deep down it goes. It's kind of mind-boggling. And one of the things that you may be able to answer for me, I've been following, they have this group that's going out trying to gather all of this plastic back in, and they're bringing back huge amounts of plastic every time they go out with relatively different degrees of success. My question is, what are they doing with it when they bring it all back?
There's a few points there that I'd like to just touch on. First of all, the floating island of plastic is a bit of a media hype. It's not a solid island of plastic. It is actually, a suspension of plastic in the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
The ocean cleanup, is a fantastic way to make people aware that something needs to be cleaned up, But the thing I'd like to say about that is that we need to stop plastic from entering the ocean in the first place. So by, throwing millions of dollars at cleaning up, the problem should be stopped, in the beginning. And as is happening, there are, barriers at rivers to stop it entering the ocean. But even further upstream than that, we need to stop it actually getting into the environment in the first place. But yeah, I mean, most of the stuff that I collect can't be recycled and it'll end up in landfill. So, lots of good incentives are going ahead where, products are being created from ocean plastic. But again, you've got to think of the carbon footprint and how many times things can be reused.
Sure.
We always go back to the point, we just need to stop producing unnecessary plastic, especially single use.
Yeah. I know another byproduct is as these plastics do break down, they turn into little microparticles. And the way some of it gets into the food system is crazy because, I believe they're baleen whales. I believe there's one whale that just basically eats plankton. And they're eating a lot of these microplastics right now. There's zero nutrition in it, and it just messes up their systems. And they have no clue that's going on, and it's there, and there's nothing that can be done about it as far as to protect these creatures.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've done a project called Beyond Drifting: Imperfectly Known Animals, and this was to raise awareness of the fact that plankton are eating microplastic particles in the marine environment. And at the bottom of the food chain, everything above that, is eating plastic. And ultimately, it's ending up on our plate because we're eating fish, oysters, whatever it might be, that now contain microplastic particles. It's kind of a shocking, scenario that, needs to be addressed at the very base.
And if you think about it, all of this took place in the span of 60 years? Because plastics in the environment is relatively new.
It is, yeah, and it's a lot newer than climate change. And, we've been researching climate change for, decades, whereas microplastics really were only first seen as a problem in about 2005. So we don't have the research to match, the scale and the continuing production of plastic. So we don't really know what the effects are yet, because research, takes time to see the effects of, what it's doing to people and animals and ecosystems. So this is one of the problems, but, I'm convinced in my lifetime that plastic will harm us as humans in a detrimental way.
Okay, we're going to take a short break. We come back more with Mandy Barker, and we're going to talk about how she comes up with her creative images. Stay tuned.
We hope you're enjoying this edition of the B&H Photography Podcast. The best way to support the show is by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. For links to gear and more information on today's guests, check out the show notes in your podcast app or visit our homepage on the B&H Explorer website and join the B&H Photography Podcast Facebook group. And now, back to the show.
Okay, we are back with Mandy Barker. Mandy, it's terrific speaking with you. Let's talk about the creative process right now. You're taking garbage and making art. I hate to boil it down, but in a certain sense, you are meaningful art, art with a purpose. Okay, could you get into the process? Obviously, there are all different scales of things that you're doing, but what's the nugget? What's the center of your creativity? Where are you working from on this?
Yeah, well, thinking of my early work, I use a black background, and this is a piece of black velvet that I carry around with me to wherever I might be. If I'm on an expedition, this comes with me.
How big? Just curious.
It's about 1 meter by 2 meters.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah, when it's traveling.
Okay.
Bigger in the studio. And then if I'm sort of traveling, I randomly scatter the pieces of plastic on the black background, and I try and photograph with one directional natural light source. So, for example, when I was in Henderson, island, I actually found a cave, and I laid the black background within the cave. So I had one directional light source coming out of the cave, because this seems to give the feeling of suspension.
Mm-hmm.
I just use a bit of a fill-in reflector, but apart from that, it's main one directional light source. And I first scatter the smaller items of plastic on the black background, and then remove them, scatter the medium-sized objects and take an image, and then scatter the larger objects on top, because I like them to look random, like they were kind of existing in the ocean. And post-production is by using Photoshop and layering approximately 3 or 4 of these images together. And it just seems to create this feeling of suspension as if you're looking under the ocean. And by creating this sort of mass, it's representing, what exists there in a kind of a small space.
One of the things that I've taken away from looking at your photographs, even though the scale is different of the pieces in the frame, it's sort of not different than if you go out to an open field on a clear night, new moon, and stare out at the stars. And it's got this floating, multi-dimensional quality to it. And even though stars are little points of light, and what you're photographing are larger, randomly shaped, colorful things, I had the same feeling that there was this large void of objects just floating there. And I guess it's from the black background. It has a lot to do with it. But what you're doing works real well.
Thank you. Well, yeah, I think it is to do with the larger objects, as you say, and then the tiny little specks. It really does seem to create a depth, and also the colours. Although it's debris and it's been in the sea for quite a long time, I don't actually wash any of the plastic that I recover. But I do sort of 2 to 3 second exposures, and this seems to really make the colours sort of saturate against the black. And make them sort of ping out. I mean, originally I tried photographing to make the background objects blurred, but I realised that I wanted everyone to see all of the objects there. I wanted them to recognise the brands and the specific, packaging or whatever it was. So
rub it into the man.
Yeah. So everything's sharp and identifiable, but it seems to work.
What gear are you using, if I may ask?
I'm using Canon. It varies, on project to project, but the majority in the early work was Canon 5D Mark IV, with a 24 to 70 2.8 lens and a macro lens, f2.8. I also did the series Beyond Drifting, and that was just totally opposite again. I used a faulty Canon camera, which was about 30 years old, with out-of-date 35mm film. So,
is there any other way? I mean,
so it's extremes really, and it's that particular project was to represent pioneering discoveries of plankton in the 1800s, and I wanted to represent the antique sort of feel of how plankton scientific slides looked, and I wanted this sort of graininess to represent microplastics. So this is why I used 35mm and blew it up so the film grain was visible. So depending on the project and what I want to get out of it and who I want to engage with, the actual camera equipment, is determined by what I want to put out.
Now, if you also using state-of-the-art equipment, but if I'm not mistaken, you also made a camera out of a plastic chicken feeder?
That's right. Yes.
Can you enlighten us on this?
And I really encourage our listeners to take a look at her Instagram page or website to take a look at this item. Yeah. It is incredible. Yeah.
Not for sale at B&H.
Should be.
But yes, I mean, this camera was constructed from marine plastic debris that was recovered from 9 different countries around the world, and it included a chopping board, plastic bottles, an industrial tube. And a colleague made the camera for me, and with a reconditioned Schneider lens, it takes medium format film. And I took this camera to Henderson. This was the first time it was being used, so it went on and off planes all over the place, and it's fairly rickety. The way the camera focuses is by turning bottle tops on a chopping board that's had gouged out sort of ridges to make it track. I took all these images on Henderson Island. I never really believed that it would actually bring any images back because of the way it had been shaken around during travel. But it's one of my favourite projects, and I think because it's the element of control was kind of taken away from me. I didn't know if anything was going to come out, and with film, it's always a bit exciting to see the final result. But it gave a unique focus. It's almost like the plastic is photographing itself. You're looking through the body of this chicken feeder, and it's sort of taking images of the plastic debris it's actually made of. So I'm constantly trying to evolve new ways to represent, the same issue.
Now, I know you found a cassette tape that you found on the beach, and you tracked down the owner, and that's an incredible story. But I wanted to ask, have you found camera items? Have you found cameras? Have you found items related to photography and incorporated them into the work at all?
I haven't found cameras as such. I found camera parts, camera caps. I found negatives. Sadly, with no images on, they've washed away, but the film is there. I found slides, but no. I would really like to find a camera actually, because that would be another project. But yeah, the cassette tape was fantastic enough. I mean, very quickly this was found on the shoreline in Fuerteventura in Spain, and it was saturated with seawater. Of course, I left it on my windowsill for about a year and a half, thinking nothing of it, and then. One day I kind of thought, oh, well, maybe I'll send it to an audio restorer and see if he can get anything from the tape. And yeah, amazingly, the middle of the tape especially was really good quality, but he managed to identify in the end 20 tracks on the tape, which I thought would be really good to exhibit in an exhibition I was having at Photographica in Sweden at the time. So the tape was exhibited along with the soundtrack, and a visitor who visited the exhibition sent me an email after she'd visited it and said that she recognised the mixtape as being her own. She taped it when she was 12 years old and took it on a Walkman on holiday in Spain in 1993, and lost it on holiday. So this is like nearly 25 years ago. So I mean, I was actually astounded. I couldn't quite believe it. So I wrote to my scientist that I was working with, Richard Thompson at Plymouth, and asked if it was possible. And he said, what an amazing story. It's entirely possible, and also going to show that it's survived intact over all this time, shows the durability of plastic, and the threats it can impose. But yeah, amazing. I mean, the media picked up on that, and it was, I was interviewed all over the world about that particular incident. So.
Needless to say, it goes to show something we spoke about at the beginning, this idea of story and narrative, and
Yes.
how these all have a life, and it's incredible that in this case and in others, you can bring these items back to the original owner, and we can learn so much, and it is fascinating, so it gets attention.
What about the comb? Did that ever get back to the original owner?
No one's contacting me.
No one's calling back. Yeah.
I'll send in a request then.
But how is, I mean, as you said, people send you items. How is that evolved over time? I mean, this is really a universal project, I guess. I mean, how does this collaboration feel to you, I should say? I mean, because you must have made connections around the world.
Yes, I have. I mean, I think the one that sort of meant most to me was the penalty project, as I say, which involved 769 soccer balls being sent to me from all over the world. And I think it was just the enthusiasm of people to want to send the balls to me to post them. I didn't sort of really think that people would. I offered to refund the postage, but some of the balls came, seaweed, sort of seawater dripping out of the bottom of them, sand. The postman, poor guy, used to come along the path with 10 boxes of footballs with all sorts of things going on. But to just think that people wanted to be involved and wanted to have a ball in the image and have their name kind of, written down as somebody who's helped to raise awareness. Also, I did this to raise awareness at the time of the Football World Cup, because, if I can think of an event, a global event that's happening, and kind of jump on the back of that to raise awareness, That's something that's quite good. And I was actually interviewed on CNN in the US about the football project. So in the end, it was a global interaction with public around the world, and then it actually went on to, raise awareness with everybody around the world as well.
Getting back to some of the technical side of it, I'm looking at an image of yours of dice, thousands of die, I guess, in all various in levels of deterioration, having been in the ocean. Now, how much time do you spend, rearranging and rephotographing? Do you do several takes? Do you then combine images of the smaller and the larger items? How's the process go for you? I mean, is it something that you see right away, and your graphic design sense says, okay, this is what it needs to be? And just to kind of follow up on that, I mean, in this image, for example, each of those specs that we're seeing are a die.
Yes, I mean, as I said before, each image is different, and it really does depend on the amount and the quantity of that particular object and how many I can find. That was a selection from Henderson Island. I mean, talking about
all of those washed up on one island that's 5,000 kilometers from anywhere else.
Some of those die have been repeated in the image to represent the amount that were found there. When we went, we got a collection of them, but the scientists that visit the island before said that the actual beach was littered with them when they were there previously. So it's safe to assume that there has been some sort of a container spill or something that had washed up on there.
Either that, or that's where cruise ships go to get rid of old dye. Now we know. That is bizarre that you'd find something in such a remote, something that unique.
Well, another thing which was found there, which had many of the similar items on Henderson were actually bike pedals. They're actually bike pedals with the reflectors on the side.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, there's no bikes more than, sort of 5,000 kilometers away from the island. So, there's like tens or 100 cycle pedals. It's probably safe to say it's been some sort of a spillage.
I don't know if you could answer this one, but we're talking about plastics and garbage and stuff that's washing ashore and floating. What percentage of plastics, I don't know if you know this or not, does not float and just goes straight down to the bottom? Is there a percentage of that known?
There are different kind of analysis of that. A lot of people do say that there's more plastic, a very high percentage of plastic on the ocean floor than there is, suspended or actually floating.
That's what I'm wondering, because not everything floats. I mean, but then again, I didn't think bicycle pedals would float also or die, but apparently they do somehow. Either that or the ocean, the currents on the very bottom somehow move them along enough. I don't know, but I would imagine there's a lot of plastic that is out there and it's on the bottom of the sea and we don't even know the quantity of it.
Exactly. And it depends on weather as well. Storms can, tsunamis, that sort of thing can regurgitate what's on the ocean floor. And they also, kind of go into these deep sort of ledges and ridges at the bottom of the ocean. So lots of different factors that can, determine what ends up on the shoreline.
And I know also a couple of years back, there was some container ship, I believe, or freighter that went over in a storm, and zillions of nurdles, which are the raw material of plastic. They're like little slugs or plugs that are used for manufacturing other plastic items, sort of like the raw material, and like little plugs of things and the ship went over, and they're all over the place right now from that.
Yeah. The most recent nurdle spill was in Sri Lanka.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, that's a horrendous sort of cleanup operation. I haven't actually been to Sri Lanka to see that spill, but I did actually go to Hong Kong to see, at that time, was the world's largest nurdle spill. And, it looked like it had been snowing on the beach. These white nurdles were just completely covering the beach. And as you say, these are the most sort of detrimental pieces of plastic because they're unsealed, because they go on to make plastic products. And when they enter the ocean, the toxins are absorbed into the nurdles, which birds and animals then eat, and these toxins are reabsorbed into the fat cells of the creatures. So, one of the worst microplastics.
Ugly stuff.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about the Union of Concerned Photographers?
Yes, this was organised by WeTransfer, and it's a group of photographers that were commissioned to photograph different aspects of climate change, drought, wildlife, temperature rise, deforestation, and plastic. And these images have appeared on WeTransfer. You know, when you're about to send images somewhere, you get a back page or something you can click on to read more about. So this was a really good way of engaging further interaction with these different issues, and of which I'm part of. This was a commission by WeTransfer, which was very successful in raising awareness with people who use that platform.
Sorry, jump back a bit to some of the photographic work. I mean, do you enjoy that aspect of it? I mean, how much time would you say is dedicated to actually, making these images, and when you are creating them and readjusting and lighting, and is it a process that you enjoy?
As I say, I enjoy the research and the process more than the final creation of the final image. But then, it's not to say I don't enjoy it. I do enjoy, because it's almost the amalgamation of everything I've put together, and it's the final sort of end, really. Yeah, I mean, I enjoy different projects for different reasons, and I do perpetually try to do something new with a series rather than just recreate the same style, because obviously that would be boring to me and it'd be boring to other people to just keep seeing the same thing. So I keep my interest by, trying to change certain things or presenting things in a different way, using different cameras or techniques or whatever that might be.
Your project, which I believe is called Still FFS, and it is taking your work to a different level, and kind of the effect. I mean, there's no humor in these images. Let's put it that way. And there's nothing fun about these when we're seeing, the carcass of birds that have died simply because they ate plastic pieces. Can you tell us why you decided to go, to this degree or this style of photography compared to the other work, and what it meant to you, and how it's been received?
Yeah, this is the first series that I've worked on where I've actually showed a bird or an animal affected by plastic. Previously, I've just shown plastic in images. Very briefly, this is one of the largest colonies of flesh-footed shearwaters nesting on this stunning, beautiful location of Lord Howe Island, which is between Australia and New Zealand. But unfortunately, there's a darker side to it. The parent shearwaters are feeding their chicks plastic, which is causing starvation and death. And I wanted to kind of represent each individual shearwater with a certain type of dignity. And still, by using a beautiful image, this contradiction between the dying birds and the stunningly beautiful environment of Lord Howe Island, I decided to combine two images, one of the dead bird on the lab table and the second with places around the island that they would have enjoyed when they were alive, like the sky and the lovely environments of Lord Howe. And I didn't really want to show any plastic in these particular images. I had images of the birds cut open, with all the plastic pouring out and the blood and guts and all that sort of thing. And in some ways that needs to be seen. But I think the way in which I work is to be a kind of a passive activist in a way, and not show the blood and the gore, but to somehow come in at a different level, and make people imagine that without sort of forcing the obvious. One of the images, the final image, does show part of the plastic coming out of the bird, but I wanted to kind of create this sort of dignity within the bird, really. And it was a very difficult thing to do because the sensation of picking up a bird in the wild from the shoreline and feeling it and hear the plastic crunch within its stomach is something that I can never ever really describe, and I don't think anyone can really understand unless they've done it. It's a horrific thing. So it was a difficult project to do because I had to feel like I had to somehow do justice to the issue, and you kind of go away and hope that you can do something that will be impactful.
Well, I
So I
think
hope I
very
have.
successfully. Yeah, no, I mean, you feel the dignity and death of these birds, and understanding how this came about, and of course, in some cases, seeing the plastic is jarring. Certainly, did you do this work in the field? Were the photographs taken all in location?
Yes, yeah, on
Yeah.
Lord Howe Island, yeah.
hmm hmm And then there's some post process work done, I imagine, as well.
Yeah,
Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
wow.
And I
Wow.
kept sketchbooks there, and I photographed the plastic individually, almost as a separate part of the series. I photographed the plastic that had been taken out of the birds, and even as I was photographing them, they reminded me of, they looked like kind of jewels or faces, or, had all these different kind of markings and where the plastic had cracked and things like that. And, there was recycling tags in there, and even branded pieces of plastic, which I felt needed to be seen. But this is a kind of secondary part of the project, really. The birds were the most important part.
Clearly, yeah. The photography industry itself, hasn't been the best when it comes to pollution over the years, and needless to say, the use of plastics is growing in cameras and other devices. I mean, how does that affect you, knowing that your medium is photography, and it has its own kind of history and relationship with pollution, and is that ever come up in conversation, and how do you grapple with that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I have to be totally, kind of aware of that and conscious that I do the best I can. I mean, when I have my work mounted in exhibitions, I try and, wherever possible, to use eco products where the print can actually be taken from the backing, and the backing can be recycled. This is like a kind of an eco corrugated cardboard. When I have exhibitions, I try and make sure that they can tour, so the work is reused, and it's not printed every time there's an exhibition in a gallery or wherever it might be. And I have national and international touring shows at the moment that use the same work. I'm very aware of, I don't use many chemicals in my own sort of development if I'm using digital or whatever, but alternative processes. I'm looking at sustainable alternatives to chemicals, plant-based options and things like that. So it's right across the board, from the carbon footprint, from how the work travels to what it's packaged in. There are many, many different areas that need addressing and that people are becoming more aware of now. Certainly when I have an exhibition, that's the first thing that I, ask.
What are your thoughts on what we can do, and our listeners can do, in the sense of, I imagine it all starts with using less.
Yeah, well, if you possibly can, stop using plastic wherever you can. If we refuse plastic, then manufacturers won't be producing it because there won't be the call for it. If you can reuse what you have, whether that be a bottle, a bag, whatever that might be. If you want to go further, you can sign petitions to persuade government we need legislation, global legislation, to make manufacturers responsible for the end of use products. I mean, we're still producing 400 million tonnes of virgin plastic every year, and about 50% of that is single use, which is then thrown away. And that production is set to double by 2040.
Are we making any headway as far as manufacturers taking responsibility for the packaging of their products in any manner?
Certain supermarkets in the UK are, making single-use plastic. They're banning it
Yeah, we're
this year
doing
and
that
next
same
year.
here, which is great. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a start. And there are many good incentives that are happening. But when production is set to double by 2040, that is the really scary thing, because
Yeah.
although we're doing all these things, to say there's going to be twice as much plastic by 2040, and they're saying that there'll be more plastic in the sea than fish by 2040.
That's pretty ugly.
There's something going wrong.
Yeah.
And action is needed more than ever, especially, after the pandemic, which has kind of felt like a bit of a setback with all the extra plastic that's been produced. So yeah, I mean, and recycling isn't enough. We can't recycle our way out of the crisis because less than 10% of plastic ever produced on the planet has ever been recycled. So that's not the answer. The answer is to stop producing unnecessary plastic and create a system to stop plastic entering the environment, and simply to design out plastic. To use other things that have a zero carbon footprint.
Yeah. Yeah. Mandy, it's been informative speaking to you, and your work is amazing. So it's a good combination of qualities for a show. Pleasure speaking with you. If our listeners would like to catch up to your work, well, first let me ask you: you have some exhibits going on right now. So where are they, and what's the schedule with your exhibits?
Yes, I have my first exhibition in India at the moment in Goa, and that's on until the 12th of March. I have a solo exhibition at the Auckland War Museum in Auckland, New Zealand, and Planet or Plastic National Geographic touring exhibition is in Italy and at the David Brower Center in California.
Okay.
And I've got upcoming exhibitions in Malaga in the summer. And I'm also very pleased to have been asked to exhibit at the Fox Talbot Museum in Lake Ockavie in England, which, of course, is the place where William Henry Fox Talbot, the pioneer of Victorian photography, has the world's earliest surviving negative of 1835. So it's amazing to be alongside that. Yeah.
It's got to be satisfying to know that what you're doing is making a difference, making a little dent in this massive world. So that's really terrific. It really, really is. And I also, if people want to see your sites, Instagram, websites, anything of that sort, go to?
Yeah, go to Mandy Barker Photography on Instagram, Plastic Pieces on Twitter, and my website is mandy-barker.com. So yeah, please go ahead and learn more.
And all of this information will be in our show notes. So if you did not have a chance to jot it down, it's there. I strongly suggest you take a look at it. The work is very powerful and actually has a purpose. There's a lot of beautiful photography, but not all beautiful photography actually has a purpose. Aside from being beautiful and satisfying to our aesthetics, this is something that actually makes a difference in our lives. So thank you, Mandy, for what you do and all of your efforts. And thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And, this is another platform, again, where I can inform people about what I do and about the issue of plastic. So many thanks to everyone for listening and for you to having me on.
Our pleasure. If you enjoy listening to the B&H Photography Podcast and you're still not a subscriber, do Uncle Al a solid and head on over to wherever you snag your podcast and sign up. It's free. It's easy. And while you're there, a few kind words in the feedback department means a lot to us, and I personally thank you in advance. My name is Alan Weitz, and on behalf of John Harris and Jason Tables, thank you oh so much for tuning in today.